Hello again, everybody. In this video I'm just going to talk again about my current reading, my usual eclectic reading. Recently I have been reading, let me see, this book, Lights Out, where is it? Lights Out for the Territory by Ian Sinclair. Now this is a book that I've heard of for years and years, and I kept meaning to read it, and I finally have read it. And to be honest, it was a bit of an effort, to be precise, reading it. What it's about, it's a sort of classic work of what's known as psychogeography. These are people who wander around, particularly cities like London, and they're interested in the associations of the places that they walk through. The people that have lived there over the centuries, and various things have happened there, and they refer to it as psychogeography. It's a bit pretentious, but Ian Sinclair is one of the primary ones. There's been a group of them in London, based in London, for years, and they do come up with some quite interesting stuff, actually. He seems to have a bit of an obsession with Dr. John Dee, who's a person I'm very interested in as well, who was a famous, he was a mathematician, a geographer, various other things in the Elizabethan and Jacobean period, but he was also rumoured to be an astrologer and a magician. He was one of the great sort of mages of Europe, and he lived in Mortlake and had a house full of books and strange instruments, which sadly was destroyed by a hostile mob. He had rather a sad life in some ways. He spent a lot of his life trying to communicate with angels in order to get all the knowledge of the universe. Some people think he was the model for Prospero in Shakespeare's The Tempest. Anyway, he's one of the characters that seems to feature in this book by Ian Sinclair. It's quite interesting, and he walks around, in the course of the book, he walks around parts of London that I know very well. I spend a lot of time, years walking around, and then later cycling around all over London, because I am a Londoner, and I am also very, very interested in the history and the associations of London. So it's quite agreeable, but the downside of it is that it's what you might call it's a bit pretentious in style, and he's a bit of a sort of literary artistic name dropper. So it drops a lot of names of people who were kind of trendy in the sort of what you might call the alternative arts scene in London in the early 90s when it was written. And he also has an obsession with Mrs. Thatcher, so everything bad that's ever happened to London is all to do with Margaret Thatcher, apparently. So that was a bit tedious, but it's got its good moments, so it was worth reading in the end, anyway. Now, another book I'm reading at the moment, I'm reading this very, very slowly. This book is called The Master and His Emissary. Oops, you can see it, yes, by Ian McGilchrist. He's based here in Oxford, actually. I believe he's a professor, he has been a professor here. This book, sorry, I seem to have something in my throat again. This book is very interesting. It was given to me, or it was lent to me, by Mr. Nick Wicker, who's a friend of mine here in Oxford, and this is his favourite book. He's made a big point of this. It seems to him, he seems to think that it's really, what the guy's talking about in this book is really, really crucial to understanding what's going on in the world today. I think it's probably right. What it's about, as you can see possibly from the title, it's about the brain, but it's particularly about the way that the brain is divided into two halves, and the implications of this, not just in terms of anatomy, but it has all kinds of implications, because, as most people know, the different halves of the brain deal with different things. For example, one thing that I found out from this book is that the right-hand side of the brain deals with the left eye, and the left-hand side deals with the right eye. I mean, broadly speaking, it's more complicated than that, because there is interplay between the two halves. But anyway, the left eye, if I remember this right, I think it's the left eye is used more for general awareness of things around you, and the right eye tends to be for more detailed observation of specific things. I might have it the wrong way round, but anyway, one eye is for one and one is for the other. And obviously we use both all the time, but it's noticeable that, for example, quite a lot of animals and birds will, if you approach them, they'll look at you with one eye, and then they turn their head round and look at you with the other eye. Their general eye is keeping a watch to see if there are enemies approaching roughly, but then if something does approach, they turn and use their other eye to actually have a good look and see what it is. Anyway, that's just an example, but it has all kinds of implications, and I haven't got very far into the book, but it has implications about how we perceive the world, actually, and the way that the world, effectively, the world we live in, is, in some sense, actually determined by the very structure of our brain, and therefore trying to be objective about it at all is problematical. And the interplay between our subjective experience and the supposed objective world and the way that the brain works is all very complex and it has all kinds of implications. Another thing that he points out in the book, which I never knew, which is quite amazing, I think this is right, he said that the number of connections, neural connections in the brain, is equivalent to the number of known, I think it was molecules or particles in the known universe. I mean, that is just incredible in one brain. I mean, billions upon billions of connections. It just shows how complex it is. So that's an interesting one. A bit serious. I'm finding it a bit heavy going. This is a less serious book. This is very entertaining, though. Out of the Steppe by, what's his name? Daniel Metcalf. I love reading travel books. I'm addicted to travel books, and particularly certain particular parts of the world, like India. Anything about India is something I enjoy very much. But this one is also about a part of the world I find interesting, which is Central Asia. And it's about the so-called lost peoples of Central Asia. I mean, over the millennia, various groups have distributed themselves to Central Asia, or in some cases been sent there, for example, under Stalin, under the Soviet Union. And there are some quite curious groups left in that part of the world. And he went on a trip, this young guy went on a trip. Some parts of it are actually quite dangerous, like Afghanistan. He went to try to discover some of these people, and he did actually have some success. For example, there's a pagan group in a place called Nuristan in Pakistan who are still worshipping pagan gods, and it's thought, some people think they're descended from the army of Alexander the Great, and they're still worshipping gods descended from the Greek gods. Of course, they're very unpopular in Pakistan because Pakistan is overwhelmingly Muslim, a very intolerant form of Islam, and they're constantly being pressurized to convert to Islam. So that was fascinating as well. And here's another odd one. Now, I'm very interested in history. I'm interested in all kinds of things, and history, and particularly this country. And this one is called Knut, England's Viking King, by M.K. Lawson. He's an expert historian on this period, what we call the Dark Ages, or the early Middle Ages, perhaps. And this one is quite intriguing. It's a little bit dry in style, but it's a very fascinating period because not so many people know that there was a period in the 11th century when England was in fact ruled by a Danish king, Knut, otherwise known as Canute, the one who tried to tell the waves to go back and found that there was a limit to his power. And it's a fascinating period in English history. There were all kinds of things going on, and the Kingdom of Wessex in particular, under Alfred the Great, had resisted the invasion by the Saxons and the Angles and the Danes and so on. But Alfred's descendants were not able to resist indefinitely, and eventually Canute and his Danes, the Danes had been establishing themselves in the north and east of Britain, actually overcame the Saxons, and Canute made himself king of all Britain. He was not only king of not Britain, sorry, he called himself king of Britain. He was king of England, in fact. The Welsh were still resisting violently and would refuse to be anything to do with Canute. He was king of England, but he was also king of Norway and of Denmark as well. So there was a kind of empire, a northern empire during this period, and Canute was the king of it. And he although he was a pretty savage character who's led lots of wars and harryings and slaughterings and so on, he also was extremely generous to the church, especially towards the end of his life, probably when he was thinking about his prospects for heaven. And a lot of early charters, a lot of monasteries and abbeys and cathedrals owe their origins largely to this Canute character. Anyway, what happened in the end was that when Canute died, the old house of Wessex, the Saxons, actually reasserted themselves, regained the throne. So then there was an English king again. But unfortunately, of course, it all ended very badly because Edward the Confessor, the Saxon king of England, died, and then Harold Godwinson, one of the claimants to the throne, tried to resist both the Danes and then later the Normans, and of course he was defeated. He beat the Danes, but he was defeated by William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings, and the Normans took over, so that was the end of the Saxons and the Danes. It's a very interesting period anyway. And finally, the other book I've been reading just recently is this book. Now, this is one perhaps I want to talk about a bit more. I don't want to go on too long, but it's the Cambridge Companion to Michael Tippet. Now, Sir Michael Tippet was one of the major composers, British composers of the 20th century, certainly, along with Britten. Britten and Tippet are often put together, and there were several other ones as well, but particularly Britten and Tippet. Now, they were both a huge influence on me when I was growing up, and on my taste in music and on my ideas about music. And Tippet, both of them had an influence. Britten had more of an influence, I suppose, a musical influence. His actual style of writing and his musical concepts have been very influential on me. Tippet was influential musically, but he was more influential on me from a point of view of what composers are doing, what is the role of the creative artist and particularly the composer in modern times. Tippet was a curious figure in many ways. He was born in 1905 and he had a very long life. He lived into his 90s. He died about 1997, I think it was. He was 92 or 93 when he died. I actually dedicated work to him in 1996 for the tercentenary of Henry Purcell. And I got a letter back accepting the explanation. I've lost the letter now. I'm always losing things like that. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to come to the concert because he was too ill, which is very sad because I would have loved to have met him, especially as he died only about a year or so later. Anyway, Tippet was a curious character. He was he was typical of the kind of person that George Orwell was rather rude about in one of his essays. He talked about sort of sandal-wearing, vegetarian, bearded, left-wing pacifists, blah, blah, blah. He didn't like them very much. He found them a bit cranky. And to be honest, Tippet was a bit cranky. There's no getting away from it. He was quite a cranky character. He had a curious upbringing. He didn't come from a musical family, and he had to struggle to find a musical voice. He was well into his 30s before he really started writing music that he thought was any good. And he also had his own idiosyncratic approach to social issues and so on. In his early years, he was attracted to communism. He was very temporarily a member of the Communist Party of Great Britain, but then he left because he found them too rigid in their thinking. And then he went on. He became less. He wasn't involved officially in formal politics after that, but all his life he was a pacifist, and he very much stuck up for oppressed groups in society, including gays. But he was gay himself. This was at a time when that was really, really difficult, and that was one of the groups in society that he later stuck up for quite a lot. He had this idea. He didn't want to write political music as such. He did try a little bit very early on in his career, but later on he decided he didn't want to write kind of agitprop music, but he wanted to write music that would speak to people in the 20th century and address the issues of the 20th century, the very difficult issues of the 20th century, but not in a direct political way, but in a more of a psychological way. Now, he was very influenced by the great psychologist Jung, who was a colleague, a pupil, and then a colleague of Freud, but then split with Freud because he disagreed with Freud on certain points. And he basically became a founder of a particular form of psychoanalysis, which was a great influence on Tippet. And I've been influenced by Jung myself, and Jung's ideas, and that's because I discovered them through Tippet, through some of Tippet's writings in my teens. And Tippet's idea and Jung's idea was, of course, Jung believed in this thing called the collective unconscious, not just the personal subconscious of Freud, but the collective unconscious, that we all, in some way, the deeper minds tap into a great kind of collective memory of humanity. And there are lots of things that come out of that memory, what he calls archetypes of the collective unconscious, which are deep-seated in human culture, and there's symbols which occur in legends and tales and poetry and in art, and that those archetypes have a huge influence on us. We are kind of, the way we behave and the way we think and the way we perceive the world is to a large extent determined on the unconscious level by these ancient archetypes. And for Tippett, the idea Tippett had, which has been a big influence on me, was that creative artists, and particularly composers, are a kind of vehicle for the collective unconscious. That the role of the artist or the composer is to give expression to these deeper, very deep-seated symbols, fantasies, dreams and so on of our unconscious mind, of our collective unconscious mind, which are very important, but most people are not in the position to actually express them objectively. But artists do, because artists are dreamers and live in a kind of imaginary world, and are able to bring the deeper thoughts and ideas and emotions of their experience, and of everybody's experience, out into objective form as works of art. That's a long-winded way of putting it, but that's basically the idea. And I think that's a very important idea, and I still believe that now. And Tippett talked about, in an age of violence and destruction, of bringing forth images of calm and of peace and of beauty, and that's something I very much admire. I think that the modernist conception of art is in many ways mistaken. A lot of modernist artists, or even postmodernist artists, think that what they should be doing is reflecting the fragmentation, the chaos, the violence, the disunity of modern society. I think personally, and I agree with Tippett about this, that what we really need to be doing is the opposite. We need to be compensating for all that chaos and fragmentation by producing art which is consoling and uplifting and has images of beauty and calm in it. And really that is a lot of what I try to do in my own musical. This is not my musical channel, but I happen to be talking about it now because obviously that's my main interest. And if you want to know more, you're very welcome to go and visit my my channel about my music, which is called The New Lyricist, and there's lots more on there and examples of my music. But anyway, so that's Tippett for you. And the book is very interesting. It goes through various periods of his life and talks about various works and also various genres and so on. It's probably his two most famous pieces of the Concerto for Double String Orchestra, which was the first really great piece he wrote, which is one of my favourites still, and also a famous piece called A Child of Our Time, which was written during the Second World War, and that is a prime example of the kind of thing that Tippett was trying to do, because it deals with an incident that happened in Germany under the Nazis. A young Jewish boy's father had been, I think, imprisoned or killed by the Nazis, and in revenge he went and shot, the boy went and shot a Nazi official, which led to a terrible massacre of the Jews. So it was very tragic all round. And Tippett addresses this, but he doesn't address it directly politically. He tries to posit the idea of the child of our time, the boy, as a kind of example, an archetype of lost humanity in the modern world, and the tragedy that we go through when we keep repeating violence and killing, and the frustration we experience when we find we can't find a way out of this impasse. And he's trying to say that what we need to do is collectively, as human beings, try to move on to a kind of a different level. Whether it is entirely convincing, I don't know, but it's a very moving work. It's one of his most famous pieces. So that's the Cambridge Companion to Michael Tippett. And if you don't know Michael Tippett's music, I recommend that you go online, and you can find a lot of it very easily. Anyway, I've been going on far too long. I've been going on for nearly 19 minutes, so I'll leave it at that. That's been my current reading, and if anybody's got any comments, or if they're interested in the same books as me, or would like to recommend any books, do please let me know and leave a comment. And by the way, also, if you like this channel or you find this video interesting, please like the video and please subscribe to my channel. So goodbye for now.